So I'm Peter Constantine, Professor of Translation Studies at the University of Connecticut and publisher of World Poetry books. And I'm also the translator of Gzegorz Kwiatkowski, a new and dynamic poetic voice from Poland. He has published 6 volumes of poetry, and collections of his have been translated into French, German, Greek, Swedish, and Slovene. He's also the vocalist of the Polish psychedelic post-punk band Trupa Trupa. Rolling Stone has called his lyrics a clarion call for humanism in a hateful world. Though Gzegorz Kwiatkowski's poetry has been translated so extensively and into so many languages, I wanted to show you this very slim chapbook, Crops, which I translated, which was published by Rain Taxi in 2021, is all that exists in English. But the moment it appeared, responses from major international literary figures came flooding in, which was quite unexpected. In my 40 years in translation, it had never happened for any of the projects that I'd worked on. So I'd like to read a few snippets of some of these responses. So the British poet Alice Oswald wrote, "Kwiatkowski's poems are sharp as knives, but as soft as people. I hardly dare read them." Robert Haas wrote, "Harrowing, impressive, the ruthlessly efficient way in which this terrible story is told." Jonathan Franzen, "There's a wonderful balance between the heaviness of the subject and the lightness of touch. The poems seem to be written from a perspective where comedy is the same as tragedy. The effect is really powerful." Cynthia Zarin writes, "In these searing, darkly beautiful, indelible poems, Kwiatkowski reminds us of what, at our peril, we must not forget." So I first encountered Gzegorz in 2015 in an article in The Guardian, so I encountered him on the page. The article was about a terrible incident. And by the way, am I echoing or am I fine? Because I'm echoing, right? Am I? Okay. This sounds like there's a second Peter Constantine speaking back to me. The article was about a terrible incident, which, from what I understand, was to be the beginning of Gzegorz's career as a poet and activist. When he was a child, Gzegorz and his grandfather would visit Stutthof, the concentration camp, where his grandfather had been interned during World War II. In the summer of 2015, Gzegorz and his friend Rafał were walking through the forest outside Stutthof when they came upon tens of thousands of old shoes, tattered, weather-beaten, many decades old. What could these shoes be? Whose shoes were they? Well, they were the shoes of the dead, shoes that had been gathered by the Nazis during World War II, taken from people murdered in concentration camps throughout Europe, and brought to Stutthof for a macabre recycling project, and to be reworked into an array of practical leather goods. The bureaucratic term in German was Lederverwertung, so leather processing. Today, in the Stutthof Museum, as part of the exhibit, there's a mound of shoes, but as Gzegorz pointed out, after his discovery in the forest, the exhibit is just a token, a pale hint. So the many thousand shoes Gzegorz found in the forest had been dumped and buried in the 1960s by the Polish government that felt it was healthier not to dwell on the painful and controversial years under Nazi occupation. I wanted to offer this context for our poetry reading, since Gzegorz's experience at Stutthof is at the core of his work. I'm certain we will speak more about this later on. But as you will hear, each poem has a voice, a narrator, and these voices are those of the victims, the perpetrators, those who helped, and those who looked the other way. And what we thought of doing was reading the first 2 poems in Polish and in English, so that you can hear the rhythms and the sounds of the Polish. And then after that, we'd like to read in English, we imagine that That might be better language, comprehensible to all, right? Yeah.
I just want to say hello, and it's great to be here, and it's a very symbolical thing for me to be here, because many years ago, David Kramer called me, and he said, what do you think about being a part of an event in a Jewish Theological Seminary and speak about your activism, about your poetry, about your music? And I was very astonished, and I didn't know what to do really, because I didn't have this idea to speak, to have university gigs all around the world. And David proposed it. I was very afraid, but then I said, okay, let's do it. I think this first event was very, very successful. And the feedback was amazing, and that's how it started. I mean, it was many years ago, and during the pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic, and after that, I had lectures almost everywhere. I mean, at Yale, Oxford, Berkeley, and Stanford. So Jewish Theological Seminary invented me as a guest lecturer on universities, and it really gave me a lot of spiritual strength to move forward on this genocide landscape. So I'm very, very thankful, dear David, and now I'm here not in person situation, not on Zoom, and it's very, very important thing for me. Thank you. So now we'll read a bunch of poems, firstly a bit in Polish and English, and then only in English, and then we will discuss the stuff with you if you have any questions. Yeah, let's rock. Wydarł. Gdzie jest Izaak, Mosze i Wefa? Wszyscy śpią o tu pod tą ziemią. Gdzie jest Rachela, Stefan i Aleksander? Wszyscy oni śpią pod tą ziemią. Stawiski, Tykocin, Radziłów, Czyżew, Drohiczyn, Jedwabne. Zarżnął nożem 18 Żydów, mówił on to w moim mieszkaniu, kiedy stawiał piec i słońce nadal oświetla dom jego i jego wielopokoleniową rodzinę. Ty Żydówkę wymłóciłeś za młynem, a potem podrżnąłeś jej gardło. Cieszy się we wsi ogromnym poważaniem, pomimo kawalerstwa i zaawansowanej starości, a na jego drzwiach do dzisiaj można przeczytać: Żydom, Cyganom i diabłom wstęp wzbroniony. Uderzył dziecko prętem żelaznym tak, że mózg rozprysnął się na jego ubraniu i kazał matce to czyścić. Ciężko pracował w polu do późnych godzin nocnych, był dobry dla swojej umierającej matki, nie sądźmy go w tak trudnej godzinie. Zaczęli bić tak, że nie miała białego ciała na sobie, tylko czarne. W tych dniach panował duży chaos. Codzienne sprawki i przewinienia mogły wydawać się czymś wyjątkowym. O Panie, Tyś wydarł nas z ich rąk, płonąc w stodole, płonąc.
Actually, before I read, I'm glad I heard you read that, because the first time you read it in the past was softer somehow. I don't know if you're reinterpreting the poem as more of a... Because I'm almost panicking, because I'm the translator and I ought to know that. And so tell me if... I hope it still reflects what your intention was. So burning. Where are Isaac, Moshe, Vefa? They're all asleep here beneath the soil. Where are Rachela, Stefan, Alexander? They're all asleep beneath the soil, in Stawiski, in Tykocin, in Radziłów, in Czyżew, in Drohiczyn, in Jedwabne. He had butchered 18 Jews. He told me this in my apartment as he installed my stove. And the sun still shines upon his house and the generations of his family. You raped a Jewess behind the mill, and then you slashed her throat. In the village, he is greatly respected, despite being a bachelor, despite being decrepit. And to this day, a sign hangs on his door: Jews, gypsies, and devils not welcome. He hit a child with an iron rod, brains splattering upon his clothes, and made its mother clean the mess. He worked in the fields, toiling late into the night. He was kind to his dying mother. Let us judge him not in his hour of need. They began beating her, turning her white body black. There was so much chaos in those days. Such everyday misdemeanors and transgressions might now seem something special. O Lord, thou pluckest us from their hands, burning, burning in the barn, burning.
Plony. Nasz prawdziwy zawód to rolnictwo, nie zabijanie, chociaż przyznaję, rzezie na bagnach odbywały się w rytmie prac sezonowych i kiedy były duże deszcze, nie wychodziliśmy po plony.
Crops. Our real work is farm work, not killing, though I admit the massacres in the swamps of the rhythm of our second labor, and when the rains were heavy, we did not go out for crops.
Graves. Corpses were thrown into the well, buried in pits, dugouts, in horses' graves, and then the children pulled them out from the well, from the pits, from the dugouts, and from the horses' graves.
Margarete Hauptmann. In the living room is a soldered coffin. For a month my husband's reeking corpse has lain. How powerful he was once, how powerful his head, his voice calling everyone to order. Even cows and beasts of the field feared him, and now he's rotting. Without authorization, his body cannot be taken away, and it is already the end of July.
Whistling. They didn't know where to run since it was an open field and they ran in circles. How we laughed, and before we killed them, we even whistled some tunes.
Walter Stier. My father, a decent office worker in the railways, never took part in any of the shootings. He was just doing his job, organizing transports, eastward and westward, north and south, back and forth.
Dora Drogoj. Her head had been sawed off with a blunt saw, and nobody knows where she was buried. Perhaps it is a tall tale or an obscure joke, but her head had been sawed off with a blunt saw, and nobody knows where she was buried.
Buzia Weiner. Born 1937, died 1943. I was 6 when I was killed. My sister Shulamit was 4. After we lost our parents, we wandered around Rokitno. We learned to sleep in the fields, and with time crept into cowsheds and drank milk from the udders of the cows. We didn't have a calendar, so we didn't know when it was our birthday, and ended up celebrating more than once a year this sad celebration.
Richard Glazar. We arrived in Treblinka at 15:30. We crowded around the windows. I saw a green fence, barracks, and I heard something that resembled a running tractor engine. I was delighted. The place reminded me of a farm. Wonderful, I thought. I'll get a job, about which I know a thing or two.
Ernst Jünger, born 1895, died 1998. War has let me down, modern war. Modern war has not met my expectations. I didn't live up to its literary ideal. For example, there were no horses.
Good morning. Most of the townsfolk came to see their murdered neighbors. Some lay still alive in the pits. Good morning, Mr. Broomberg. Good morning, Mrs. Bulkin. Good morning. Good morning.
Stanislav Galus. My sons killed the Jew Balanovsky. Balanovsky sputtered as they finished him off. They stripped him and dragged him away, one grabbing his legs, the other his head, up the hill like a bull, naked, and buried him.
World. I went with my child to the forest and cried helplessly with him. Tears dripped from my eyes, and the child wiped them away with his hand, and I so regretted that I had brought him into the world.
Mr. Mieszajewski, they killed one of them by the pond and the other in the bushes. It was not a German who murdered the Jewish women, but a Pole. He raped her first, then murdered her. He's no longer alive. Mr. Mieszajewski.
Karl Stoika. Not Hitler, Goering, Goebbels, or Himmler drove me out and beat me. Not them, but the milkman and the postman next door.
Jaffa Eliach. Everyone who survived owes it to the Poles. And all who were killed also owe it to the Poles.
Walter Stier. My father, a decent office worker in the railways, never took part in any of the shootings. He was just doing his job, organizing transports eastward and westward, north and south, back and forth.
Karl-Heinz M. I was 14 years old. I was sterilized because I could not tell the difference between a brook and a stream, between steps and stairs.
Dentist Elise Utne. After the harvest, the potato stalks were on fire, but actually it was people who were burning. Ditches were dug around the pyres to drain the fat. I think it was Holy Thursday.
Home. Franciszek raped her first, I was second. Basaniuk, the farmer, was out in the yard. I cannot now decide who was to blame, me, Franciszek, or Banasiuk. But I regret that it happened. And after the murder, we all went home.
Choice. When it became known through the village that I kept a Jewish woman hidden at my farm, I had no choice.
Szymon Srebnik. I didn't believe I would return to Poland ever again, to Chełmno, and that I would stand where they killed me. No, no, no.
Forest Ranger Dance. During the war, we laid out bodies like wood, but after the war, we laid out wood in the forest like bodies freshly felled. And then the next poem is called Joseph Kwiatkowski, and it's a very special poem because it's a poem about my grandfather, who was a prisoner of a Stutthof concentration camp. And the point of it is that by an accident 2 years ago, I found his camp notes. And it was very amazing for me because I didn't speak with him when he was alive, almost, I mean. And of course, he was a very traumatized man. And I was really astonished because I found out the genetic memory is now a proven fact, but the point is that I found out that my poems, my rhythm, my voice is almost the same as his voice. And I couldn't have a chance to know about it. So this poem is based on his camp notes. It's almost like one-to-one, his camp notes. Joseph Kwiatkowski. I was the hardiest of the lot. Although I had used up all my strength, I helped carry away the dead. It is impossible to convey an impression of that work crew in just a few words, but I will try. The sick died in agony on their way to the latrines, in the latrines, or on their way back.
Walter Stier. That exterminations took place came as a surprise to me, a complete surprise. Like that camp, what was it called again? 1 second. It belonged to the district of Opole. Ah yes, Auschwitz. Auschwitz had been assigned to Opole. Auschwitz was not far from Krakow. That's right, but I'd never heard of it.
Hippolyta P. Mieczysław told me that murdering a Jew didn't mean anything to him, and he came over and showed me a stain on the wall in the house where I lived. saying it was here that Jews' heads had been hacked, and there was blood. I saw it with my own eyes.
Officer Dudin. When they arrested Officer Dudin, they asked him if he had really thrown living children into a pit. He replied, I didn't throw them, I just placed them in there.
Killed. I am extremely happy that I experienced the war in this way, killing and not being killed.
Abraham Bomba, my friend the barber, a long time ago in the valley of the river Bug, by a railway siding and a gravel pit, shaved the heads of his entire family and looked them in the eyes before they were killed.
Hermann Goering. Anyone can make a film about crimes, pulling corpses out of graves and then showing tractors pushing them in again.
Raus, 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 schnell, schnell, schnell. That's how they drove us out of the wagons like potatoes poured out of a sack.
We managed. It was extremely difficult not to see the connection between shooting and killing, but we managed.
Leocadia, Bleischak. As for that book by Gross, what annoys me above all are those lies about how people's eyes were gouged out, their tongues cut off, that soccer was played with chop-off heads, and all this while clarinets were playing. I can assure you that in Jedwabne we knew nothing about clarinets. There was a volunteer fire brigade, but without an orchestra.
Thank you.
Well, it's actually, I must say, I'm quite stunned after reading them in one go, because I think it's the first time that we've read in this way. We've done one or two events before, but what we did was a softer reading in the sense that we would read one or two poems and then talk, one or two poems and then talk. But so reading them through like this here, I must say, it's almost like, dial 911, I need to be carried out. It's surprising, particularly as it's something that I've spent a lot of time with, sort of hearing it, in this context. And in our selection, we did try to somehow mirror what some of the books look like, either Kropp's or the other books. I'm Gzegorz German translator as well, interestingly, because German's my mother tongue, and also the Greek translator, because I grew up in Greece. But all of those things sort of happened by mistake almost, because we sent out the manuscript to Greece, and they said, well, would you translate it? Because we don't have any Polish translators. So, one thing about the distillation that I find interesting is like how you manage to sort of condense your poems, and you broke down and confessed that you have a very strange way of writing. I don't know if you still write that way.
I don't know if I'm doing it, but I just don't know if I've got it right here. Yeah, I've got it right here. So the point is that I'm writing the poems on the old mobile phone without a connection to the network. So it's broken. It's very hard to write anything on that broken stuff, and the one poem can only be the length of one SMS. So I always just to try to be as lapidary as I can when I'm driving a car or I'm in a bus or.
Well, hopefully not driving a car.
Not driving a car, but the point is that I'm trying to be as lapidary as I can, and then I'm taking these notes to my computer, and then I found out that the poem is here, right? It's ready, because it's hard to put it into this old stuff. But the point is that writing this kind of a very horror stuff is very problematic. It's very problematic to write about this kind of issues, because firstly, most of these voices are real voices. So I'm rather like a sculptor. I'm trying to make some sculpture work around the real testimony voices. It's a hard territory. It's very easy to go into the kitsch territory or to melodramatic territory or fantasy territory, and I hate these kind of things in art. So, for example, this is the first thing I use, and the second thing is I'm listening for more than 10 years every day per 8 hours per day to the Glenn Gould, the Canadian pianist, and Glenn Gould was always playing in a very neutral mathematical way, almost anti-emotional way. So when I'm hearing the very neutral mathematical way of playing, and I'm digging this kind of stuff, then for me it's like then I'm sure that I will not go deep inside the big emotions. And what I also think about the tragedy of Holocaust, and because it's also connected to my family issues. So my grandfather was a Pole. He was imprisoned in Stutthof. His sister too, but my wife is a Jewish. So my wife is a Jewish. My sons are Jewish, and so I'm from Polish Jewish family. But the point is that I didn't know that my wife was a Jewish for many, many years. And I asked her grandmother many years ago during the birthday party, because you have to know one thing about me, that I'm very a man who is making constantly faux pas after faux pas, you know what I mean? I'm asking a very direct, a bit stupid question. So I asked grandmother of my wife during her 80 years birthday party, what were you doing during the Second World War? So it's not a great question. And she said to me, of course I was hiding in the forest. And I said, well, why? And she said, because it was the Second World War time. And I said, okay, but most of the Polish people didn't hide in the forest. And she said, she was then very angry, and I said, are you a Jewish person? And she said, no, I hate Jewish people. When I was a child, I saw 2 Jewish boys who stole a Holy Communion from the church, and they took it on the meadow and they crushed it. So I said, I know the story. It's a medieval ages pogrom story. It's not your story. So it was the end of the birthday party. And then my wife told me, I didn't know that I'm Jewish and we are Jewish. And now I know, after many, many years, that they all knew, of course. And for example, my wife, when she was a child, she was playing with a Ken and Barbie, and she was playing in hiding. It was the game. But they were so afraid that she even didn't say to her husband about that. Can you imagine till now? So now we are processing this thing. She is more and more open. For example, our second son, who is now 8 months old, his names are Joseph Isaac, and my wife gave him this name. So she's reconnecting with her Jewish roots, but it's very, very hard, especially, Poland is a very anti-Semitic country, right? Now the whole world is a very anti-Semitic place, right? More and more, unfortunately. Maybe even US is more anti-Semitic now than in Poland. It would be hard to imagine about 2 years ago about such things. So that's the point, that I'm lucky to unlucky stuff, I mean, that I experience a lot of tragedies from the past, which are not only tragedies from the past, as we can see right now. And the poems are the result of it. I mean, that I really believe that by saying these very dark stories from the past, by facing them, we can make something good towards future. I mean, I really believe in educational aspects of their art. I don't know any better educational instrument than art. So that's why I'm doing it.
Are there any questions that you might like to ask? Yes?
Lift your microphone up a little bit.
Yes? It was a question.
No, that wasn't the question. So it's interesting to hear you describe the experience of reading these sequentially, and it almost, you needed 911 to take you out, I think is what you said. Your poems, Gzegorz, are, I mean, you know this, focus often on very, very brutal images, right? Very painful images. It's hard to listen to. They are often also focused on the mundane, right? Kind of everyday forgetting, we don't make that connection, which is as painful in listening to as the more graphic representations of the crimes that were committed. You just said something about it, but I actually want to ask the question again. what do you hope the poems do, right? By sharing, by insisting that the reader or listener focus on these brutal scenes, by insisting that the reader or listener be aware of the ease of committing these awful crimes and somehow dismissing them as part of just what life was, part of what life is. What do you want your poems to do? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think that my poems work like a moral traps for the readers, because the narration of these poems, if you read, for example, the whole book, you've got the voices of the murderers, perpetrators, observators, and the narration is very open and very neutral. The tone is very neutral, and I think that the reader suddenly is inside and he has to answer the questions. On which side is he? You know, what could he do? Is he condemning the murdering acts or no, for example? And I think that it's like a moral trap. You know, if someone has got his moral apparatus is turned off, I think it can be turned on after reading this kind of stuff. And it's not only my imagination, but a lot of people told me that after reading this poetry. It's not about pornographic images of evil. I mean, I hate this kind of art, to be fully truly. I think it's. I think that another point of this poetry is that it's so normal, that the tone is so normal, and I think that people hate it in an organic, normal way. If you hear this kind of obscene stuff, and it's said in a very neutral way, you are rejecting it. And by this act, you are suddenly inside in the story. You know, I remember, there are more and more people that claims that Holocaust didn't happen, right? It's like it's a problem. It's not my imagination. You know, more and more people thinks it was like a science fiction story from the past. So I think that this moral trap, it forces you to face it, and then you can do whatever you want to do with that. But you are hit by this poetry in a very delicate way. It's very perverse in some way, but I don't like perversity in art. But I think it works. What I wanted to say that I know people that can tell me it works. So in the past I didn't think about my art as I didn't think about me as an artist as a person who is educating about Holocaust and about genocide. But now I'm really proud about my roots, and I think that by talking about the history of violence, we are trying to avoid the violence in the future. Unfortunately, now we are living in super violent times. Who could expect it? I don't know. It's like unimaginable. But so I think that this kind of art is even more important than ever, and it's not. It has got nothing to do with my ego and. Anyway, I'm a rock and roll musician, so I can do some ego stuff somewhere else. On the other hand, my band, Trupa Trupa, also talks about Holocaust, Shoah, and my band, psychedelic rock band, also touch the topics. But very important point is that my art, my poetry, my music has got almost zero feedback in Poland. This art is almost rejected in Poland for many, many years. We as a Polish people don't want to hear these kind of things. So this art is successful in the US, in Western world, but in Poland it's like almost totally silence around this art. It's like, so what? You know what I mean? So what? You're telling this story and that's all. And of course, it's also because Polish people don't want to hear that they were perpetrators, for example, part of them. So I'm like a black sheep, but I don't care.
So in the previous hour, there was a presentation of an excerpt from a Yiddish play about someone who translated the New Testament into Yiddish, and one of the things that came out in the discussion was that there was a reaction to it that said, "I can't say that it's good, but I can say that it's beautiful." Right? It's not good, but it is schön. Right? Meaning, that somehow there was a separation between the ethical and the aesthetic, right? And I'm wondering, in the light of your poetry and what we just heard, there's a lot of brutality in it, as David was just noting. Would you, as the poet, make that same distinction and call your poetry beautiful, or would you call it something else?
I think this is a great question, and it's like a trap. Thank you. I mean, it's all good. But the point is that I think that every writer is a musician. It's all about hearing, about the rhythm. And as I told you, most of the voices are the real voices from the testimonies of real people, or my grandfather, etc. And I'm very fragile to the rhythm and the musical aspects of when someone is speaking. And when I saw this musicality and beauty, because this poetry has got beauty aspects and musicality, it was said by survivors, for example, and I was just struck. You know what I mean? That I heard it, because I will say something more. The art is an entertainment, if we want it or not. This is an entertainment, and the big power of art is because of that. It's entertainment. We can spread the anti-hatred message through art because this is an entertainment. So entertainment has got the beauty aspects. Of course, it's a very, very dangerous territory, because then suddenly you can be like a kitsch. You can use, for example, you can use the Holocaust for your artistic purposes to shock people. There are a lot of these kind of artists. So you never can be sure. I can't be sure that I'm doing the right thing. I'm always testing it, discussing with Peter. Isn't it too far? What can we? It's not like, okay, this is great, let's say about it. This is very fragile territory, very delicate territory, and it's like a one big trap. But I think that I need to speak about it. I mean, Poland was the territory when one of the biggest genocides in the history of the world happened, and these ghosts are still in the air. It's like, and now we can see, that the rising of anti-Semitism everywhere. So suddenly the history is one more time here. There is Vladimir Putin, very probably in November when Donald Trump will win the election. I hope he will not, but if he will win the election, very probably Vladimir Putin will attack one of the Baltic states. He will use this timing, you know what I mean? I hope I'm wrong. But suddenly we are living in the era of wars, of violence, of crimes. I think we have to just work harder and harder in these educational aspects, and art is playing the very major role in educational aspects.
I think that in Western society and modern age, we think about atrocities as living in history books. It's something that happened in the past, and we're removed from it. Even most artistic representations, then it's some fantastical story. It's still removed from us. And I think the effect of your work is so important. The matter-of-fact style elicits a visceral reaction, which obviously you had just reading it now, even though you're so familiar with the words. And I'm curious if you have any processes for yourself when you're writing this really heavy material. Is there anything that you do for yourself afterwards to process that?
Well, it's a great question, thank you. I think it's awful. I mean, that, for example, this reading for me was awful. I wasn't satisfied. I was like a shock. I mean, that I'm writing about something. When I know that I will write about something, I know about it because I'm rejecting it. I don't want to touch it, to be fully truly. I'm not fascinated by this territory. I would like not to write about it. It's too much for me. But on the other hand, I know that it happened, right? And I've got this kind of, maybe it's a genetic memory, I don't know, but I've got this kind of, by the way, when I was 9 years old, my grandfather took me to the Museum of a Concentration Camp Stutthof. And it was his first visit after Second World War. So he took me, and we went there, and he was in the state of trauma. He was crying, shouting, screaming. So I was totally, I didn't know what to do. I feel a bit embarrassed, ashamed, But after all, it was one of the most important events in my life, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And so I think that because I was also in a musical school, I played on the clarinet and saxophone. Now I play on the guitar. I think that for me, what I wanted to say, I've got very strange character. My wife would say more about it, but I'm very funny, almost like a clown. You know what I mean? My character. I'm not sad. I'm not pessimistic. You know, although I've got pessimistic ideas deep in my heart, but I'm just cheerful, very vita activa, not only contemplativa, and I'm just moving forward. And that's the point that I'm not giving up. I'm very vital in the sense that it doesn't make me sad. In the perfect world, I'm dreaming about perfect world where there is no place for such a poetry really, and I could only write about sunsets, for example.
Hi, wonderful. So, as somebody not that well versed in Polish poetry, I know Milosz, and I wanted a little bit, and I wanted to ask you, what was his relationship to that violent past, and what about, did he bypass it as well, or and is a younger generation of Polish poets more explicit about the violence in the past? So part of it is, where does your work fit in with other major Polish poetic efforts?
Okay, got it. Thank you. Czesław Miłosz is like one of the biggest writers for me. So he was a great writer. He wrote a lot about Holocaust. He was really taking care, and he made a great major work. Now in Poland, writers, for sure poets, are not writing about Holocaust, and they don't touch this topic. When I was a young poet, critics in Poland always said to me one thing: don't write about history. Don't touch the history. History is not a topic for a poetry. They always said to me the same thing. So I had 3 years ago a backlash in Poland. One of the, actually it was a Holocaust scholar, very young Holocaust scholar, who said to me, you can't write about Holocaust because you don't have any Jewish or concentration camp roots, and you don't have a mandate to do it. You're using voices of dead people, and you're making an entertainment and you should shut up. And it was very rough, very, very aggressive review. And I'm always very lucky to unlucky stuff. So finally, there was the biggest scholar in Poland who was a survivor from the Polish ghetto in Warsaw. He was called Michał Głowiński. Michał Głowiński was the biggest authority in the literature of Poland after the Second World War. He was like a Marcel Reich-Ranicki in Germany. He was like a top critic. So he was a Jewish survivor, and he hated the literature who is using the Holocaust in a bad way. And then he speak out, and he said about me that I invented the new way of writing about Holocaust in the Polish language. So I had an imprimatur from him, and I was saved from this debate. But anyway, I think that in Poland we don't speak about it, especially in poetry. And I know great people in Poland. For example, my friend is a great Polish Jewish director, Agnieszka Holland. She made a movie, Green Border. It won a special jury prize on the Venice Film Festival a few months ago. There are great Polish artists. Usually there are Polish Jewish artists, and they are not afraid to speak about it. But most of Polish people don't care, and I'm sorry to say so. I'm not happy to criticize my people, but this is the way it is. On the other hand, I just will say, we'll end with the optimist note. On the other hand, we just won democratic elections in November. We've got really great government, very pro-European Union government, pro-LGBT, very open-hearted people. So we are just turning in a new era, not super nationalistic era. I'm also an activist, so I was fighting for a commemoration of a Jewish ghetto in the city center of Gdańsk for 8 years, for example, and now it happened. The city hall told me it will be commemorated, and it was commemorated. So there are a lot of things that are happening in a positive way. So I think that suddenly, maybe from Poland, there will be some, this country will also have some impact on the world, really. So I'm very optimistic, but we've got a lot of work to do, for sure.
So I want to thank Gzegorz and Peter. This was very, very powerful, and I think has, really things have come from the heart and entered the heart and the mind here. And to everyone who's been part of these 2 days, I think since this is in the end, a religious institution, I just want to end with a couple of words of a kind of a universal prayer that may it be that all people always pursue peace and truth and wholeheartedness, not holding on to disputes forever, especially with those with whom we disagree. Let us never shame any person on earth, great or small, and may we truly fulfill the commandment, love your neighbor as yourself with all our hearts and souls and bodies and possessions. Amen.
Thank you.